as some of you have guessed, I'm an immigrant. And that means that talking about home is complicated. Home is here for me, but also it's of all those places that I have left behind. One of them particularly is special for me. It's my mother's town in northern Spain, on the coast. Its name is Ribadesella. It used to be a smaller fisher's village among mountains and the sea of unparalleled beauty. And the port was filled with wooden boats, and it had ancestral traditions. So ancestral, we even have our own cave with prehistoric paintings. And in those folk festivals, there's food and celebration, folk dances with bagpipes, and a special way of serving cider. So you have your bottle, you have your glass, and you serve it this way, right? Well, why? We can do it more complicated, like this. Food and cheese and celebration. The good things of life are the good things of our culture. But things change. With globalization, the fishing industry became depressed, and this town went into a cycle of depression. We've seen it everywhere. That made the town barely survive during decades, until more recently there was investment in infrastructure, roads that bring tourism brings money, and that brings change. Better houses, high-rise apartments, safer sidewalks, a nicer town in general, and those wooden boats were being replaced by fiberglass sports boats. And you can see how a town of proud sailors became a town of great tourist guides and amazing cooks. I guess it's better to serve tables in a restaurant than go fishing tuna in the high seas, or facing unemployment, or immigration. With that change, cultural tensions emerge between those who want to preserve the good old things of the past and those who embrace change and progress. And we see it everywhere, drawing lines and borders between us and them, between not only the town people and the city people, but between locals and immigrants. And these divisions are feeding into what some people call the culture wars. And if you haven't noticed, there's a deep divide going through every single aspect of our society in this ideological tension that brings us apart further into extremes. And you can see how these extremes have made of every aspect of culture a battlefield where we fight about climate or our views about human reproduction, the big issues of our time, where we can't really find any possible agreement. And we focus more on what makes us different. Our diversity has become the things that set us apart. And this war is not meant to be won. It's meant to destroy. If we continue this way, nobody's going to win. Japanese-American artist Mako Fujimura says that culture is not a territory to be won or to be lost, but it's a resource we are called to steward with care. He says that culture is a garden that is called to be cultivated. But we think that culture is this big abstract thing that comes from a big city and is fancy art or has names like cuisine or couture. But in reality, culture is made of the things that are close to us, made by people like us, from all over the place, even small towns. Writer Andy Crouch says that culture making is always a small-scale project. Yes, changing culture, the culture, is hard and complicated. But making cultural goods, making culture is always a small project that starts with one person who becomes 3, who then becomes 250. It's always a small-scale project that starts with the initiative of somebody like Dionisio de la Huerta, back to my mother's town. This guy in 1929 had a new canoe, a new kind of wooden canoe called piragua. And he decided to set on an excursion with his friends. He called a couple friends and went down river. And after 7 hours and 14 kilometers of looking at landscapes, draining the poor canoe, they basically tried to discover a new route to navigate the river. A couple years later, they invited friends to have a race between a river, a bridge upstream river in Arreondas, to the river, the mouth of the river outside in the sea in Ribadesella. And they, without knowing, started a new cultural good called the descent of the River Sella. Fast forward, 1985. The race brings 1,200 rowers from all over the world. It's an international event. And it is probably, if not the most, one of the most important events in the world of its kind. It attracts 300,000 people every year who celebrate for 3 days, and you can just imagine the cultural impact. I don't think Dionisio had that in mind, and he was just a young guy who wanted to go on an excursion with his friends. But you can see, 3 guys became 13, became 1,200. There are now 300,000 every year. And this also can happen, you can see, in small towns, not only the big cities. When I was starting my arts career in Mexico, I had my first exhibition solo, and I was excited because there was this famous artist who was going to see my show. And she said something like, "I like your work, you're talented." Great. But, it's a painful part. Your work is too nice, too polite, too provincial. Then, she said, continued, "What you should go is move to New York City, get immersed in the noise and the chaos, and something great is going to come out of it." Yes, maybe my work at that time was conventional, was not challenging enough. I assumed that as, maybe a reality. But the word provincial got stuck with me because it assumes that anything cool has to come from the city. Art has to come from the city. And suburbia and small towns, we can aspire to have hobbies. We can aspire to craft, right? Well, guess what? I live in a small town, 60 miles from Chicago. I also work Chicago downtown in the Field Museum, one of the most important natural history museums in the world. And I commute every day. I enjoy and endure the 4 hours a day of coming back and forth between all these boundaries that I love crossing. But I would never give up either of them. I would never give up the vibrant excitement of the city and the calm and beautiful creativity of the downtown, of the area where I live, Geneva and Batavia. I can see creativity coming from everywhere. I can see how things are perceived differently where they come from. But it really doesn't matter, because these cultural goods are made by people like us who are also coming from small towns and big cities. They have shapes like books or songs or recipes. And if we focus on the impact, well, what is harder, to have impact in a big city or have impact in a small town? And how about your workplace? And how about your group of friends? And how about your family? And how about yourself? If you really start to look inside and see the things that are worth doing on their own, don't worry so much about the impact. The things you create will have a life of their own. Centuries later, we'll see. That's culture. It works over time. It takes centuries, generations. But what we can do now is start to do things that will increase our positive cultural footprint. So, my positive cultural footprint is made of the small contributions that I have. They range from my father's recipe for paella that I have written down, perfected, even though he thought it was perfect. And I've been polishing it and improving it. But also I translated it in English, so now it's an international cultural good. And I share it with friends and family with names like Simon and Tom and Matthew. And it's also made of my artwork that I hope one day in less than 10 years, I will be able to put in my local art gallery in Batavia. Or my work at the Field Museum, helping create exhibitions that are seen by 1.3 million people a year, maybe more. And those exhibitions matter to me because why we do them, and also the way we design them is my contribution. It is our job to capture all the passion of the people that care deeply about natural and cultural diversity, our scientists, our artists, our collaborators, who are passionate about their stories, and it is my job to understand that passion, drink the Kool-Aid, catch the bug, and then once the passion is captured, my job is to make it visible, to make it beautiful, to make it inspiring, perhaps even contagious. Even if it's passion for lichens. Lichens. Yes, there's people who are really passionate about lichens, and after learning about them, they're really fascinating. Meteorites, lichens, ancient cultures. I am fascinated by fascination. And in this fascination, I try to create opportunities for people to get engaged in this passion. In my 25 years of experience working in creativity, mostly collective creativity, I have discovered that it's very easy to get stuck building, drawing borders, turf wars, right? Our expertise, the things we believe, the things make us different. And at some point, we get walled in, and there's no way to move beyond that point. How do we move forward? And here's where I want you to use your imagination. Imagine that instead of conquering a territory or defending a territory, what we're trying to do is carry around this fuzzy, permeable bubble. That's our culture. Each one of us has a different combination of a fuzzy sphere of interests that range from our language, our ancestry, our beliefs, the things we care about. And when I carry my bubble, somebody else carries their bubble, and we allow those bubbles to intersect on the things that we care about. There might not be those big issues, like, for instance, is it okay to go Cubs or Cardinals? I will never be able to convince you that the Cubs are better. Like the same way I cannot be convinced that putting ketchup on my hot dog is wrong. But we can find those intersections in the things that we both can care about. Let's say it's the beauty of sunsets. We heard today about rivers. We heard today about children. I mean, who can disagree on the beauty of some of those things? And maybe we can intersect those interests and create something beautiful together. I mean, town hall meetings are great opportunities to vent our differences and our disagreements. But can we get unstuck? Can we get beyond those differences? Can we find a way around and intersect in the things that we care about, that we both can care about? And perhaps we can build something together. Maybe an experience. Maybe we can share an experience of watching birds, or sharing recipes, or sharing a collection of rocks. I actually found a fossil out there. I'm bringing it back to the museum. But the reality is we can find those shared experiences like what we're having here today, what we had last night. Then we can probably rediscover our mutual humanity. And if we rediscover our mutual humanity, we may be able to create a common good, at least a good in which we're both now acknowledging each other. And maybe we can become friends, or maybe even discover love. Thank you.